Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. My name is Asad Lalji. Amchi Mumbai, Maximum City, Bombay Mary Jaan, the gateway to India, India's gateway to the world. However you choose to refer to our city, we can all agree that Mumbai is a city like none other. A unique melting pot of diverse cultures and religions, sights, sounds, fragrances, and tastes. At Avid Learning, we are fascinated with the wealth of experiences, happenings, and encounters that the city has to offer, and that the many avatars, histories, and perspectives it encompasses. Began in 2012, our series Multipolis Mumbai, we'd like to think is a tryst with the city. This series has explored the city's rich past while looked forward to new horizons whilst tracing the journey how colonial Bombay has become the Amchi Mumbai of today. We facilitated over 40 curated programs, yes, 40 curated programs under this series across various formats like workshops, panels, discussions, city walks, and a retrospective at the Kalagur Arts Festival 2013, and also at the CSMVS in 16. For our next avatar of the series, we began in 2017, where we began to explore perspectives of the city, ranging from businesses, brands, philanthropy, poetry, alternate identities, women writers, women in theater, and so on. Continuing on this dialogue with the city today, we turn our attention to the fascinating subject of illustration and its contribution to this dynamic visual aesthetic of Mumbai. The NGMA Mumbai, Ministry of Culture, Government of India, and Avid Learning are proud to present Multipolis Mumbai, Illustration and the City, a panel discussion that will discuss the various aspects and mediums of illustration, its history with Mumbai, and how each creator, in his or her own unique style, has contributed to the ever-evolving visual aesthetic of the city and its people while retaining the medium's ability to engage with masses and tell stories in the most unique way. This program is a continuation of Avid's collaboration with the NGMA, and I'd like to thank Mrs. Anita Rupavataram, I think Mr. Shankar is here, and her team for giving us this opportunity again. It gives me great pleasure to welcome on stage our panel of experts. Now's the time you come. Just kidding. Graphic designer and illustrator and founder of Studio Cole, Meera Malhotra. Graphic designer Anirudh Mehta. Cartoonist, author, and advertising creative director Cyrus Darawala. And our moderator for the evening, journalist and design writer Bindu Nair. For more about each of our esteemed panelists, please refer to the bio handouts that you have collected. Again, remember some housekeeping rules. Remove this, put it on silent. You won't get any service here anyway. Start using them, start posting, reposting. Our handle is @AvidLearning, and our hashtag is Learning Never Stops. Thank you very much. Over to you, Bindu, and look forward to a fascinating discussion. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming here for this panel discussion today, Illustration in the City, where we're going to look at how... Can everybody hear me? Yeah. At how illustration as an art form has managed to articulate the spirit of this city and shape its visual aesthetic. Today's panel is especially interesting given the diverse panel that we have here today, the diverse practices that are represented here today. Meera, I'm going to individually introduce everybody. I know that Asad mentioned, that's fine, right? Meera Malhotra is the founder of Studio Cole. She's a graphic designer and a visual artist. She has a decade-long experience in the field of design. She first studied applied art and later finished a postgraduate degree in graphic design from NID Ahmedabad. She's also a member of the Karak Collective, a collective of South Asian women, non-binary and queer folk who work in graphic storytelling of all kinds. We're going to talk about that more in the final segment. Her work is centered primarily around image making, but she also works on design strategy and visual branding. Our second panelist, Cyrus. Daruwala is a cartoonist, author, and advertising creative director. He's authored and illustrated 2 award-winning books, I Take This Train 2 and Painful People. His original comic strip, Zal, features every Sunday in midday. Based in Mumbai, the city and its people provide the canvas and creative fodder for much of his work. Our third panelist is Anirudh Mehta. He is an independent visual artist, graphic designer, and art director. He runs Studio Big Fat, under which he takes up commercial projects and also works closely with the independent music scene in Bombay. So we're going to talk a little bit more about music and how that influences your work. He's worked on projects for brands such as Puma India, Red Bull, Adidas, Facebook, and was recently in the news for being the design lead for the title sequence of the critically acclaimed Netflix series, Sacred Games. So thank you to all 3 of you for being here, and to Asad and his team at Avid Learning. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you.
I wanted to start, so just full disclosure, I don't live in Bombay anymore, but I lived here for 17 years. And one of my favorite lines about this city is, Mumbai is a city, but Bombay is an emotion. And I think it was really appropriate to kind of remember that line when I was starting this discussion in saying that, it's very important to understand where you are today to kind of go back and dial back to what was there before that brought us here. And I thought it would be appropriate to begin with 2 iconic legends in illustration, Mario Miranda and R.K. Lakshman, who in many ways, not just for me, but I think for an entire generation, basically defined what Bombay was. So I just wanted to understand individually from each of you, how much of that legacy has shaped the visual aesthetic of Bombay as a city, and for artists that have followed since then.
Okay, so I also grew up with, I'm half Goan.
Right.
So I grew up with a lot of Mario Miranda, definitely. And there were 2 distinct, I think, styles that he had, like the caricature style and the slightly more realistic style.
Yeah.
And a lot of what was mainstream was that cartoony style that he had.
Right.
And I think that whole idea of like positioning a location or a very, iconic location in the background, and then having the kind of iconic people who are the caricatures of, every single, of every single walk of life that's in Bombay. I think that really has had an impact on the city. And you see a lot of work that's also copycat work from him, of his, and also inspired by him. You still see that. And I think it's really something that we are now breaking out of, but it was also something that really had a big influence on like a lot of the slightly older illustrators, I think, all followed that same kind of line, and they took it into different places, but it really has started from there.
Okay.
Yeah, I think what you said about Mumbai is a city and Bombay is an emotion.
Yes.
I think both these artists properly, articulated that in their work. And it also had this very playful kind of depiction of Bombay in all their work, which was really interesting. Yeah.
Actually, all of you have a mic.
Oh, you do?
Just share
Oh, sorry. For me, R.K. Lakshman, obviously defines political comics in India, but it's also a legacy that's been hard to move beyond. I remember I actually participated in this cartoonist hunt that Times of India had a couple of years ago. And they were actually looking for the next R.K. Lakshman. I happened to finish second in that cartoonist hunt. But the truth is, you can't look for another R.K. Lakshman or another Mario Miranda. Their styles were unique, and to try and copy them would, you won't really go anywhere. And I think in so many ways, the city influenced them. Though I can't speak for them, of course, but I think that's what Mumbai does. It sort of influences you in so many ways that you tend to want to document the city. At least that's the feeling that I also always had, to always want to document the people. It comes very naturally because of the whole eclectic mix.
So I want to ask you, you have Zal, which is the comic that you do for Midday, and also for I Take This Train 2, which is your self-published book. This is basically about the common man in Bombay, sort of, taking public transport, cribbing, having, the state of the public transport system in the city. That's always like great material for a cartoonist, right? So how much of that legacy sort of comes on from what R.K. Lakshman, the unobtrusive, observing everything, common man? How much of that inspiration sort of was sort of material for you to
It's hard to sort of define how much influence R.K. Lakshman had on me personally. I've never been keen on doing political comics, to be honest, because I tend to... It gets you into trouble, yeah, nowadays especially. And I can't be unbiased myself when it comes to certain political issues.
I read your
so
tweets.
Let's not... you read my tweets, oh my God. I hope no one else has read my tweets over here.
Yeah.
You know which way I lean.
I know it's hard to pinpoint and say that, this is exactly the part that I was inspired from, but I'm saying how much of that was a foundation in terms of the stuff you grew up with. Perhaps I wasn't clear in the question I was posing.
Yeah, I think talk about R.K. Lakshman.
Specifically because you're doing comics, you do
Right.
this weekly comic. Yeah, with R.K. Lakshman. Sorry, I wasn't clear.
So, sorry?
No, for me.
Oh,
I'm holding
yeah.
the mic.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry.
I think he influenced like all of us. Obviously, there's a certain amount of influence being a cartoonist, but that sort of, I think it's subliminal in many ways. It's not necessarily so obvious because I have a comic strip. Like I said, I don't do political comics, and to have that drive to do a comic every single day is really something. I mean, to sort of address such serious issues as he did in this laconic sort of light manner as he did. I'm not sure I have that skill set, to be honest. But his drawing style was just so uncomplicated that it's something that I would aspire to in that sense, for sure.
Which is actually, if you think about it, I remember, Mira, was listening to an interview you did, and you quoted Miles Davis and saying, damn, it takes so long to sound like myself, right? So, like, really the really special part, the magic is really in spending that time as an artist to come to a point where what you're making is actually, do you want to talk about that?
Sorry.
Yeah. She feels really passionate about
Yes,
that.
I do. So I think when you start out, you see a lot of influences, and I think growing up in India, especially where you have a limited idea of, because you're not seeing it, you don't see that much local work because we don't document work that much.
Right.
So my parents used to actually take me to the streets of Kolaba, and there were lots of books. Now they're not there, but they used to have these book stalls at the side. And we used to pick up all those great artists that were like, 20 rupees at that time and everything. So I would say that there were influences mainly from the West, and then we started seeing stuff from India. And I was confused because I was thinking to myself that where am I going to get my inspiration from? Am I going to copy something off of somebody else's lived experience, or do I look inside myself, look at my surroundings? And I think that's where Bombay really has come into what I do.
Because it is something you engage with every day.
Exactly. So it's more authentic and genuine. I think that's the real deal.
So, which actually comes to my next question. If you had to pick an urban theme that resonates with you, as somebody who lives in Bombay, is an artist, what would you pick? All of you are free to pick whatever you'd like. It could be the city's architecture, it could be the indigenous local communities. I've seen some really interesting work with the Kolis in Warsaw. You could have the state of public transport, migration, Bollywood, like you mentioned when we were chatting before. So if each of you wants to talk about, if you had to create something that was inspired by Bombay, what would be that theme?
It's hard to sort of pick a particular theme for me because for me the city has always been about people, like always. And it's not one particular community, not just one indigenous community. It's, that whole melting pot sort of...
like I said, you could pick anything that I haven't mentioned here, which...
Yeah, sure. So, I've always been drawn to I've been fascinated with just observing and understanding people. And there's just so much creative fodder in Mumbai when it comes to observing people in so many different...
watching.
Yeah, people watching in so many different contexts. Because, the context changes wherever you are, right? When you're traveling, for example, when you're working, you're different people, especially in the city of Bombay. Yeah.
So...
I think for me, it's definitely something to do with about the topography of the city. So of course architecture is a big part of it, but also the fact that
your work is very grid.
Grid
It's
based.
got the whole grid. So architecture, would I be correct in saying architecture? Because I was looking at your Instagram feed.
Sure, yeah.
You don't have a website, sorry.
I do, but I just actually fixed it. It's working out now.
I was going through your posts, and a lot of the earlier posts were really like very sort of symmetrical buildings,
Yeah.
and, grids, and it was very interesting because then I can actually see a lot of your work sort of reflect that.
So actually that I guess you could call it a style that's kind of developed because I never used to sketch as a kid.
Right.
So I only started working with digital tools that I had, and I kind of figured out a way to use that to my advantage and kind of create a style with that. Okay. But about the city, I mean, Bombay has got this ridiculous organized kind of chaos that's happening, and the city somehow keeps running through that. So that to me is like very interesting. This kind of haphazard stuff, but it also has its aesthetic, or it also has like a system to that haphazard.
So if you had to create something, would you call it this intangible pace? If,
Definitely,
that's a very frenetic pace that Bombay sort of somehow
100%.
seems to operate on.
Yeah, I think it's very intangible. It seems very tangible to me. Like, you see people rushing like mad ants all the time.
Yeah. And things still get done, which is what's really beautiful about it.
Yes.
Yeah. It still works. Even though there's chaos, there's a certain order to that chaos.
Right.
So I think that in some way has kind of come through in my work.
As a theme would be something.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Mira?
For me, I think the thing that really attracts me to most places, and especially Bombay, is the marketplace. Like, I used to go to Crawford Market and freak out. I would spend the entire day there until I was dead, practically, with the sun and dodging all of these, cargo coming in, going out, that kind of thing. Yeah, and like I really fascinated with found objects and the symbols and motifs of what people have already done before, I think. In fact, that's actually why I liked your street art piece as well, is that, it felt like these posters that had been pulled apart. Like, so it's already there, but it forms, like people have made, or they have designed something already, and how do you recontextualize it? That was like really interesting. And I think that's what we do for ourselves in Bombay, because there's just so many people of different kinds. It's kind of a congregation of all kinds of cultures all over India.
He said melting pot.
Yeah, exactly. And you're...
Sorry for that cliche.
Mixed bag. I have my own. When you have like this, like everybody's come together, and it's not snobbish in that sense. It's like everybody's down to earth. Everybody accepts everybody.
It's a great level of
like people say chalta hai is a bad thing, but I actually think that's a damn good thing. Like, you don't feel like an outsider when you come to Bombay. Like, I feel that other cities, they can make you feel like that. But Bombay, you just feel like I can speak like terrible Hindi, which I do. And still get by, and no one judges me too much, whatever. I think that's like the beauty of the city. It's just accepting for who you are and doesn't make a big deal out of where you've come from. I think that's great. So if you feel like an outsider, you won't feel like an outsider in Bombay. You'll feel like an outsider everywhere else, but you can always come here and be accepted. And I think that's the thing I would like to kind of... I actually also have a piece called Lift Karade, which you might have seen. It was up here. That was also on like the...
Could you explain that for everybody here? Like
the piece? Yeah.
If it was specific to Bombay, it would be really...
Yes, it was actually. So it was like a sort of a ode to the weighing machines you used to see in Bombay.
At
like
railway station?
Yeah, so there used to be this kaleidoscopic thing, and it's kind of like a novelty product. I mean, you get on it, you weigh yourself, then you get this little scrap of cardboard which gives you your weight, which is not really why you did the whole thing in the first place.
There was a little astrology in it.
There was astrology, or there would be a picture of a film star on it, like a really bad. Like, you'd be like, who is this? Oh yeah, okay, this is that person. Right. So I actually depressingly made it something like. Understanding of like when you come to Bombay, it's kind of a city of dreams as well. Yes. And a lot of migrant laborers come from here, or just migrants in general, for a better life. Mm-hmm. And they may not know that much about the city. They might have a better, they might be better off where they're from, but they come here. And I kind of recontextualize it to say, like, okay, what if you were to put your coin in and spend a little, and what would you get back from the city, and would it would it lift you up in that sense? So it's called lift karade, and it's deliberately to say like you're weighed down, but you go there and you kind of get hope. Yeah, you know, it's like a brief moment when you're on that machine where you just feel like you're a child again, that kind of thing. So that was up there sometime. If it rotates again, have a look.
It's going to probably come up later. If I had to ask you, what are all of you grew up in Bombay to some extent. Meera said you came here when you were 11, but I think that's fine. 11's a fairly young age. What are your earliest memories of, illustration in the public sphere in Bombay that you saw? Like, I know for me, it was R.K. Lakshman's Common Man, like the little statue at Worli. That's like a defining sort of image for me. And also Mario Miranda's mural at Cafe Mondega. For me, when I came here 19 years ago and had like my first beer away from home, like, against that mural, like that really meant something,
Yeah.
I'm free to do what I want.
For me, actually, I think it was the Amul hoardings that I used to always see. And you sort of look forward to seeing those hoardings change every single week when you're heading from the suburbs to town.
Right.
So, and it contained so many elements of what I actually do and love, because it was advertising, which I'm a part of. It contained comics, had characters, and humor, exactly. So, I mean, it was like a dream sort of creative for me. And another thing that I remember was not so much illustration, as somewhere between illustration and fine art were these pictures of birds, these large pictures of birds across the highway, which are still there actually, by the way. Which been there, near the airport now. Yeah, so they were across the city from the suburbs to town, and I sort of look forward to hundreds of them. Now, sadly, like the birds now, they're sort of, you don't see so many of them now. So art is imitating life now, sadly. But no, they do. Some of them do. So there are a few between, I think, as they mentioned, near the airport, domestic airport, somewhere there. I think somebody's forgotten to take them down or something of the sort. But
Someone's paying for that outdoor space.
it used to be sponsored by a company. I don't know who sponsors it now, but I mean, it's...
Sure. So that's something that...
Yeah, definitely sort of, I remember.
I think one of the really cool things that I like is this kind of unintentional art that happens in the city, which is like those beanbag graffiti markings which are everywhere.
Which is hugely successful apparently.
Yeah, so all of that, even the billboards, like when there's no ad on it, like you see they're all jumbled up with the numbers. Yeah, so I mean all of that is like, if you, as a graphic designer, you notice that and you notice these kind of layouts of typography, which is what is really interesting, yeah.
Can I just interject? I had this funny flashback. You mentioned those bean bags. When I was young in my advertising career and wanting to win awards, I did this awardee idea where I took that graffiti of bean bags, and below it I spray painted back problems, call so and so doctor, because bean bags sent to us. Try to sort of piggyback. No, it was like fake, yeah. But we tried to win an award.
It was a scam.
No, we didn't enter eventually. It was scam, that horrible word in the ad industry.
Should be
it was a good idea, but we never went forward with it eventually.
For people who don't know, scam ads are actually created for award season in the advertising industry. So you basically just run it one time and pay very little media money for it. And then you enter it in awards. It's frowned upon in general, but practiced very widely. So just one question I wanted to know. As artists, as illustrators, if there was one visual icon that you had to pick, sorry, I keep remembering to hold the mic up. If there was one visual icon that you had to pick as an artist that would sort of define Bombay for you, what would it be? For me, it would be like the double-decker red buses. Before I ever came to Bombay, that was like the one thing that I was fascinated by it. I hear it's going to be phased out in the next 3 years, so I'm really sad about that. Yeah. But you can still get one at BKC which has wings on it. So the installation by... So if there was that one visual icon that you could think of that really defines Bombay.
Okay, for me it's a bit off center in that, or left of center that way. But when I had come here the first time, I would see these pictures of gods and goddesses in every shop or in every house. And later on, when I was in art school and we were you know, there was a JJ exhibition of this particular painter. And I went and saw it and I was like, oh, he's the guy who did this. And, you know, it was like this slightly softened, large eyes, and everything is like perfectly blended. I think that was really like the thing that I noticed. And I guess it wasn't something that everyone notices, but yeah, the religious imagery.
I mean, that's the whole point. Like, you saw something different.
Yeah, and like it was in every shop and everything. That was because Bombay was the first experience. I guess also the ambassador cars and, you know, those kind of things. And I love the rickshaw. So again, very stereotypical, but I love it still.
No,
so
they exist for a reason.
yes.
Anirudh?
I've also got actually a very cliched one, but
Please don't apologize for cliches of this.
so it's the taxi art
Yes.
at the back of the taxis.
Of course.
So it's something that I'd never kind of noticed earlier, but it happened. It's something I noticed much later. I remember Kunal Rawat.
Yes.
He had
That was at Grandmother when they had
Grandmother
done the-
India. Yes,
That was amazing, actually.
that was amazing. Yeah.
Way back.
So I remember when I was working as an intern over there.
Yes.
Exactly. So he had done the cover of Creative Review, and in fact, back in the day, Grandmother India used to cover a lot of this, the local design scene, and kind
And
of bring
music as well,
bring
with
this
Bhavishwan.
Western graphic design
Yes.
aesthetic into it. So I think the blend of both of them were really interesting.
Yeah.
So that's definitely something that made me look at local design in a whole different style.
And you also designed that, you were part of the taxi fabric.
Yes.
Actually, both of you were. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I had done a rickshaw. Yes,
I
that's
remember
right.
the black and white.
With Architecture Digest, yeah.
So you did have something to do with the
I did,
Bombay
yeah.
stereotype.
It's classic, yeah.
That's good.
That was where like
Yeah,
we
yeah.
started making gig poster art.
Yes.
That was with
Yeah,
Grandmother.
definitely, yeah.
Unfortunately, the Zendi doesn't exist, and neither does Grandmother anymore.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Blue Frog, neither.
And Blue Frog.
Yeah.
They do exist in Bangalore or Delhi, I think. Not important. No? Okay, so also as practitioners of the craft, I wanted to understand how has the city influenced your gaze? And you know, I spoke to all of you about this before we started. For Cyrus, I see it as somebody who's a daily documenter of what happens in the city because of your comics. You know, it's a very relevant point. You sort of, like you said yourself, a people watcher, right? You see your sort of role as, I mean, I'm assuming you see yourself as somebody who...
And the cops also may see me like that.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it does freak out a few of my friends because I try to be as observant as possible. But definitely the city and its people definitely sort of influences me. And like I mentioned earlier, the context in which I see people's behaviors, like what first struck me about train travel is it's just that people are just so different when they're traveling, in a good and bad way. Some people are extremely cranky when they're traveling and fights break out. But what I love about Bombay is that fights are always just like arguments. They never get into usually physical violence. So it's just fascinating to watch it. I have this unhealthy fascination of watching arguments in the train to the extent that once I came like this close to somebody and these two people were arguing and then they just stopped arguing and turned and looked at me because they're like, why is this guy staring at us? Because I was just so fascinated. So interactions between people like...
Cyrus, you're weird.
Yeah. I'm a sadist,
Yes.
yeah, for sure.
Sorry, but I'm joking, yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's correct. But
Correct. Okay, you said it.
so yeah, but it also reminds me of something else that you mentioned about Bombay being an emotion.
Yes.
I think it came from that book, Maximum City. I'm not sure. But there was another sort of section that he had written that also defines Bombay for me. He mentioned that no matter how crowded those trains are, you know, whenever the train is pulling out, you'll always see helpful hands sort of extending themselves to pull you back on, no matter how packed, even if people are falling out. And that sort of, you know, defines Bombay for me and its people and the whole ethos of the city. And that's something that I always wanted to capture, at least in my train book and somewhat in Zal also in that sense. So with Zal also I keep it contextual to the city occasionally.
Sure. Okay. Meera, my question really to you was basically the illustrator as an activist in terms of, you've been fairly involved in a lot of social impact projects for Studio Cole, and I know because I followed a lot of your tweets when the Me Too movement was happening.
Oh, yeah.
So I know that
I
is
was on
something
fire.
that you, yeah. No, I think it's great because I think you really sort of, you were tweeting a lot and you were sort of sharing a lot of information at the time.
Yeah.
And I know it's hard, it's not an easy job, but I think you take that role of the illustrator as somebody breaking down complex sort of issues, through your craft. Like, how do you see your role as an activist and illustrator?
So what I've always found, like in the social sector, even abroad and here, is that they don't make use. They get very enamored by research and numbers, and they forget that to affect behavioral change, you need to kind of engage people much more. Right. You're talking about very important topics here, like mental health, like sexual harassment and things like that, and you have to often put or convince people or put them in the place of the person who is suffering or the person who needs help or the person who whose rights, I would not say suffering or help actually, I would say like whose rights you're impinging on. So like recently we did something for, it could have very well been something for Bombay actually, we did a report which was called Smashing Spatial Patriarchy, and we did an illustration for that. And the thing is that there were 12 norms that they were talking about how women are affected, etc., etc. What are the ways we think about gender? And
this was city specific to the extent of issues that affect women in the city?
It was like an urban, yeah. Okay. So it was kind of like there are working women in the city, and we've never really visualized. I've never seen a visualization of the kind of anxiety a woman faces when she goes about her day. Yeah. Like if I take an Uber, if I take it alone, I'm always looking in the rearview mirror to see if this guy is, like looking at me back. And this is a constant anxiety. If I go in public transport, I may be groped without my knowledge. So I may use maps in a certain way where I know this area I can't go through, or that area I would not go through at this time. I would be like, maybe receiving text messages from a parent or a concerned person about why aren't you at... So visualizing that was something that was a priority for us on that particular thing. And I think that helped people understand that this is a problem. And you could put a lot of nuance in illustration, which you otherwise can't, and bring together very many facets, because illustration doesn't follow necessarily realism. Right. So you can have like, if you have a person sitting in a huge hand, it means like it shows care or support. But that doesn't have to look real in a sense where there's perspective or depth or a scene that you can otherwise see. So I think that's a really powerful mode of illustration. Right. And that particular illustration, I think, got us to the point where you could totally understand this woman's day and, how she progressed and the decisions she had to make and what she had to wear. Like, if I'm going to so-and-so place, I'll have to wear this thing or that thing, and I choose accordingly. So I think that is where we can really represent content very well in the social sector. Okay. Personally. Yes. Long answer.
No, that's okay. It's interesting. Anirudh, I just wanted to ask you, you've done a lot of work in the mural space, and I love the work you did for Kona. I know it's in Delhi. Yeah,
thank you.
But I thought, like, in terms of super graphics, they actually work as a concept for a city like Bombay, which is cramped, and sometimes you're just trying to break away from saying you could create something that gives a sense of relief, visual relief. Sure. As an artist, how do you do you want to talk about that? Like how?
So I can talk about the mural that I did done at Sassoon Docks for the Street Art Festival. So that was, so usually in my work, it's never a direct depiction of the city, unless I'm working with certain images sometimes, but primarily it's never something direct. But with Sassoon Dock, the project that I worked on, that was in a way, I think it was like quite direct, because what I'd done was I'd taken photographs of the dock itself and kind of superimposed that with kind of this geometric style that I do. And what I was talking about the billboards earlier as well, this kind of misplaced, mishmash kind of layout. So that together with this and these kind of toned posters that we keep seeing in our city all over the walls, like one poster layered over another, the wheat pasted posters. So that is also something like I think is like this unintentional art which keeps happening in our city. Yeah.
I wanted to actually show you guys something and actually start this segment. Sorry, I wanted to, while I was researching this talk, there was a lot of, there was a segment on self-publishing and zines and comics. And I wanted to bring this up because I remember when I saw this tweet, I laughed so hard. And, you know, it kind of, I remember this when I was creating research for this. It's actually a tweet by an Indian artist based in Beijing called Krish Raghav. I love his work. He tweets extensively on comic culture. Yeah, could we go back to the tweet? Sorry. So basically, this is a joke, of course, but obviously rooted in some sort of truth. You know, so I'm just reading it out for people who can't read it. Many people, basically, when people come up to him and say, "So you're an Indian comic book artist. What lineage of alternative comics do you identify with?" And can we move to the? And that's basically he was saying that's this material that I grew up with, right? But how do I explain that to somebody in the West who not going to understand any of that? But so anyway, the point of bringing this up really was to say it's always interesting to understand, you know, what is the sort of alternative material. It could be comics, it could be books, music, you know, you brought that up. Any sort of material you grew up with that sort of influenced you in a way which, interestingly, you know, a friend was telling me when I was discussing this point, saying maybe it was alternative but has become part of the mainstream today. So would you guys like to address that? Is there anything like this that you grew up with? It's okay, we won't judge.
I can talk about the music kind of influence. So there was this whole, I think, around the 2000s, early 2000s, there was this kind of wave of UK-based Indian artists like Karsh Kale,
Right.
and then they were collaborating with medieval pundits. So what they were doing is kind of bringing this this Western sound and fusing it with tablas or fusing it with a sitar. Right. And I think that was this kind of really interesting melting pot of like two different cultures coming together. Sure. And I think even with me personally, like growing up, I feel like I've grown up with this kind of internet age. So
sorry, I forgot one point that I wanted to ask. I think as Indians, also there's another layer there because you've grown up with, you know, a lot of designs, education's actually rooted in Western principles. And it's, you know, you've mentioned when you went to NID was when you actually started thinking more India-centered design, right? It's just a normal function of design education in India that a lot of the stuff that you're influenced by is actually Western. So how do you kind of, you know, even when you see that, it's a very dysfunctional space as an Indian growing up because you have Western sort of design education and then you have the Indian context that you live in and all of the material that, you know, we see every day. So it's sort of a unique place in a good and bad way. So, yeah, sorry, I was just adding that as...
Yeah, I think a lot of times also you kind of find that later. Like you might, like the Western kind of influence will be more direct. But on a second layer, when you kind of peel through, then you will find these influences in India as well. I think that's what's really interesting. Right. Like similarly with these artists who have grown up in the UK and they've kind of traced back to their culture and their roots and then finding that inspiration over there and kind of fusing the two. I think that's really interesting.
So how do you see yours specifically if you had to look at what you studied and what you're doing today?
So, I mean, I don't think... Like, in fact, I was fascinated when I was invited to this talk as well because I never thought my work has this very obvious Bombay kind of theme to it.
But it does actually because
exactly.
It's
so it's something that I'm as well like discovering over time. Like I kind of trace it back as to like how subliminally maybe it's inspired from a few things that I've seen.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Mira, do you want to?
I think for me, going to art school over here, and like just seeing, you know, like the Bollywood film posters that were hand painted, or later on seeing something that's, you know, a lot of the Maharashtrian sort of, which you have lots of these amazing artists. Like there's this one called Dinanath Dalal, who I'm a big fan
He does
of.
these books? No.
He used to, and I mean, he's quite an old artist, and he is not alive anymore.
Okay.
But yeah, so they used to do these periodicals, and they used to do illustrations for these periodicals, and they were inspired by a lot of 20s illustrations, and but they were still like very Indian. So, you know, even though they seem to come from like 20s illustrators from the West, the style, the elements were very Indian. Like there was a woman in a sari, and there's, you know, she's talking to her parrot, you know, at the window, and those kind of things. I really like that.
Motives that are Indian.
Yeah, I like that. I especially like women in the domestic space, like how they interact with it. There's a whole culture there. Like there's a whole visual culture there. You know, how they adorn their mandap. Or, you know, the person who's like, you know, making garlands and things like that. I find that very fascinating. Like, how do you decorate your home? And I think that's what's come in my work so quite a bit. Is what flowers, what, you know, how does she make her home? That's very interesting. Yeah, like ornamentation, basically. Yes, yeah, that's something I like a lot.
In terms of alternative, I don't. The truth is,
it's okay if you don't.
Yeah, it's fine because actually, I have very mainstream sort of influences. I think we worry too much about Western influences sometimes because I think we. Sorry. Pinterest. You know, we naturally assimilate, in my opinion, honestly, as Mumbaikars and Indians in general, we assimilate. Influences growing up, I would maybe rate Tinkle as a certain influence, and I think that's a form of assimilation where you sort of took Western comic sort of techniques and you applied it to an Indian context. And other than that, honestly, I had a lot of Western evil influences, you know, like Calvin and Hobbes and whatnot. That's what I grew up on, and that's, I think, the amazing part of being in the city also, because you get exposed to both in multi-Indian context and also the Western influence, the international sort of exposure, which has influenced me in that sense.
There's something that is always a sort of controversial point when you talk about illustration, especially to students starting out, which is it important to develop an illustration style of your own versus offering a more sort of wide spectrum? And I know that everybody has a different point of view on this. I've done a short course somewhere where the tutor said, develop your own style, because that's what art directors are coming to you for. They have a limited amount of time, so they want to know exactly what they're getting from you. You guys have been practicing now for quite a while. What are your views on this? I'm sure there are young children, young people here today who want to know. Children.
Should I go?
Yeah. I mean, there's no right and wrong answer.
Yeah, there's no right and wrong. Yeah. So I'm divided on the topic actually. It really depends on what you want to be really. What kind of illustrator you want to be. Do you want to be a freelance illustrator who can take on multiple illustration projects? Because honestly, a variety of styles can help you there. But if you want to build a brand for yourself, like make yourself a brand, sometimes it does help to sort of develop your own style, but it can come with time. It doesn't have to really be force-fitted. Because the truth is, the people who we sort of look up to, all the famous artists, they all develop their style over time, over a period of 1-2 decades. Yeah. Whoever it might be, Van Gogh or whoever it might be. I mean, they didn't just start painting or drawing the way they did. It's only in retrospect that you sort of look back and you say that was his or her style, maybe. So
what would you say has worked for you was really what I was getting at.
I think my lack of training worked for me, to be honest. Lack of training. Like, this is the truth. I mean, by profession, I'm a writer.
Not so much honesty.
Yeah, okay, not so much honesty. I don't know. Made a mistake calling me. No, I actually started I am a writer. Okay. And illustration is something I've sort of discovered on the way. And mine has been more like instinctive, you know, in that sense. So, which is why I don't know if I even have a proper style or not. If you just see the work that's sort of floating around of mine also, I think that there's a certain similarity in the work, but I think there is a little diversity also because I'm also developing and finding my own style as I go ahead.
I think I have a lot to say on this. So one thing is that is illustration. Like I feel like if a designer role and an artist role are quite different, and an artist is known for their particular approach to things. And I feel like and of course if you want to be iconic or known, then illustration, like sort of melding with art. Like there's this famous artist called, illustrator he was earlier, called James Jean. And he started out illustration and now he's fully art. So I think that, you know, it's from that approach that you see it. A designer is more like subservient or like, you know, trying to affect the communication message and uses that. So they may change up their style just to impact the audience a certain way. So I would say it's that. I would also say that it's sometimes boredom that, you know, you want to attempt different styles, and sometimes also the fact that you might have to make money sometimes, you know, so you just have to do a lot of styles, because if you stick to one style, it could also be something that, you know, like, you know, the whole, like, India is a very trend-based country, and today you're really popular, but in 3 years the trend has changed and you could not be popular. So you have to either evolve your work constantly to match up with that, or you can just become irrelevant, which is a scary prospect. So if you choose a style, I think you can quickly become irrelevant if you become comfortable in that way.
Yeah, I think that balance between graphic design and illustration, I feel like that's kind of where I come from as well. I think it's important to have a style, like something that kind of defines you. I feel like, yeah, so I mean, I can speak from my experience. It definitely helps me a lot. There are other projects which I do which are not in my style. Of course, like she said, that's obviously just for like the money or just for to keep the bills paid. But it really helps to have your own style, because people will approach you for a certain thing, and then you don't have to really think about how do I approach this or how do I kind of crack this. As a graphic designer, you're more of a problem solver. So someone comes to you with a certain thing, and you need to figure out the right way to communicate this. But if you have your distinct style, you kind of already, like that part of the work is already done. You don't have to start from, and it's just about executing it in the right way. And the chances are like it'll get approved, right? Because they've reached you for a certain thing.
Okay. So they're already looking for something that, yeah, they're familiar with.
Right, because
Come to that level where
to have that.
yeah.
Because a lot of times you kind of, you know, you send 4 options, 4 different options from completely different styles, and then nothing works out. It's like, you can keep endlessly trying different things, but you know, it's very subjective. So it definitely helps to have a style because you are approached through that. Yeah.
This is again in how you approach your own practice. So the next question, do you blur the line between graphic design and illustration? I know for Mira, like you've said you do a lot of graphic design work as well as illustration. It's not just illustration. You said you do that because there's more graphic design work.
Also bills to pay, again.
I was getting to that.
Be honest, yeah.
So how do you see that when you approach your own work? Like, do you see that as a distinct sort of, or is that seamless?
Yeah, so I don't like drawing people so much because A, it's difficult. Like, people are difficult to draw. It's true.
Yes.
So I actually kind of like, I also like the I like the symbolism,
Yes.
motifs, icons of graphic design. And I like to combine them. So I don't mind like taking just a hand or something. I like something human in it.
Yeah.
But I don't believe that you have to show the entire body. And like a lot of the focus on art school is anatomy. And I just feel that it's limiting your communication as an illustrator. There are so many amazing illustrators in the New York Times, for example, who aren't really they use a lot of reference material or something like that. They trace over things. They use collage. So I find that really fascinating. Is, as I said before, like reappropriating imagery and like recontextualizing it. So I think you don't have to.
This tutor, I did this course, said that tracing is looked down upon a lot, but a
Yeah.
lot of illustrators actually trace when
Oh,
they don't
yeah.
have a time.
A lot.
It's frowned upon, but it's apparently very common. So he said we
Yeah.
should stop being apologetic about it.
Yeah, also like, you take pictures
Yeah.
when you go out, and sometimes you can't, like, at least as a woman, I don't feel very comfortable sitting on the side of the road and sketching somebody and having all the time in the world to do it. Like, people are going to ask me questions or
What
look
are you doing?
weird, and
Yeah.
so it's nicer to like take photos and things like that. I think that generates a different result, and that's also interesting.
On the subject of tracing, actually, I don't know about the line between graphic design and illustration for me, because I'm not a designer. I mean, these guys are more into graphic art. I always felt like whenever I've sort of gone towards that area of tracing, I just feel a little dirty, There's a certain feeling about it. Yeah, guilty. You have to go shower and all because, oh God, I traced this background and all. I don't like it. And my wife also sees it, and then she like judges me. I see her staring at it and all the time. You traced that, didn't you? I'm like, no, I didn't. so when it comes to, I always prefer like just I like drawing people actually. So I'm on the other end of the spectrum.
I'm not your friend.
No, I'm not saying I draw them well, but I like drawing people, that's all. But as you mentioned, it's all about, you can draw them however you want. You don't have to look at, I don't come from art school too, so it's not about anatomy, it's just about
I think
subject.
you weren't indoctrinated with that thing, so it's
Yeah, I
actually
wasn't.
freeing for you. For
Yeah,
me,
yeah,
it's like I'm
absolutely.
always like, oh shit, where's the book, where's the reference, where it copy the muscle and all that nonsense.
Yeah, that can be taxing, I'm sure.
But you spent a lot of years doing that, right?
Oh yeah, we did a lot of live drawing.
Yeah.
Like model in front of you, you're sitting there and like, days and end. Same pose you have to take. You're positioning the live model so that they're exactly the way it is. And
The grass is always greener, because for me, that would be the life that I would have loved in college life, I hated studying and I hated giving like written exams and all. I'm like, why couldn't I have gone to art college and all? The answer is because I didn't qualify.
But we had 7-hour exams in applied art.
But
So
that still sounds amazing to me, I mean, honestly.
Nobody's going to
Both.
art school after listening to this.
yeah, probably.
Whoever's sitting here. I mean. Sorry, Anirudh, do you want to answer that? But I said, do you see the distinction?
What was the question again?
The line between
Illustration and graphic design.
Illustration, graphic design.
How do you approach that in your own work with reviews?
So I think that line kind of gets blurred when you have, what I was saying earlier about when you have a style.
Yeah.
I feel like then that line kind of blurs out.
Sure.
But it's important to have the basics of graphic design. So I've studied graphic design for 7 years. And I think in that, when you've studied design, you understand important things like layout, communication, like using the right typeface, what's like the balance of the page. And once you kind of apply that with your illustration style, I think that just blurs those.
It's a good foundation to have, and then
It's a 100% great foundation to have, because I think graphic design, when you're studying it, it's not just visual stuff; it's also design thinking. I think design thinking is one of the most important things. Like as when you go to a design school, it's one of the best things to learn actually. Completely, because construction of like a very tiny curve, yeah, it's really interesting.
I was going to come to self-publishing, and I know that Meera and actually Cyrus might have more to talk about that, because you've both published your own projects and spent your own money and created. You did not spend your own money.
I'll come to mine.
So I wanted to, this is a specific question to Meera, and Cyrus, you can answer that after. How have zines and comics emerged as a response to an urban landscape like Bombay? I know that there have been a handful of zines that have existed. There's Gazy that I remember that I've seen, at the zine festival that happened in Bandra. Are there specific, first of all, are there zines that you particularly remember that you admired, which would really be a lot of marginalized sort of groups that, were able to find a way to kind of bring out what they wanted to say?
Yeah.
Which might be more mainstream now?
Yeah, so there's a group of queer individuals called Labia who've been around since the 90s. So they're very alt in that sense, and now through Gazy they've gotten a new audience. So you're looking at queer culture in the 90s through their zines, and they've repackaged and published them.
Right.
And I think that was really fascinating to me, to see these people that we did not know about at all.
Right.
Like completely, like they were talking about these issues before, and now they're, yeah, from Bombay.
That's what I'm talking about.
So,
like it's
yeah.
a lot of...
Definitely that, yeah.
And so, you know, you have Unfolding the Sari, which is
Yeah.
a zine that you created yourself.
Yes.
And you said, I was reading up about that. Do you want to tell us a little bit on why you wanted to go with a zine in the first place? Like,
Oh, yeah.
you were fascinated with zines. That's...
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of riot girl culture, which
Yes.
abroad, which is a sort of a punk feminism, you know, and it was very raw and very angry, and I'm like, I can relate to this. And it would never be published mainstream because it was too raw and too angry, and it was made up of like girls, like, you know, scrapbooks on how they felt about things happening to them. And I of course, as usual, my question is like, I have an international sort of an influence here of a culture that has emerged and established itself, and how do I kind of make my response to it, but from the vantage point that I am from in India or in Bombay. So for me, it was really like the idea is that zines are published on cheap paper, and flyers in your marketplaces, those guys who stand and, you know, like pass out flyers. That was something I saw as a parallel. And the other thing is that I was like, let's make something that is very cheap paper. Like literally, the paper cost of Unfolding the Sari is 1 rupee per sari. But I kept hearing from people, you know, because there's this hoity-toity design sort of thing where you have to, you know, publish it with like really expensive paper, and then only it is good. I have like take real issue with that. And I was like, what if we, you know, use like a terrible paper, something that's looked down upon, and repackage it in a way that it's valuable because of its content and its format. So it became a miniature sari, which is folded down, and each fold kind of defines a panel. And it tells a story of, it talks about the sari as like, you know, having a very dual nature in culture, where you have like
sexy versus
sanskari. Sanskari, exactly. So, your original question was what? Sorry.
Basically,
start
you know,
talking.
zine culture in general it's been a way for
Yeah,
a lot
why?
of marginalized
Yeah.
communities to be able to, you know, talk about the things that matter to them, which
Yeah.
may not be, they wouldn't be able to publish this in a mainstream sort of publication, but it's helped
Yeah.
a lot of underground communities. And especially in Bombay, you know, you see, like my knowledge, of course, extends to Gazy because I saw that at the Zine
Yeah.
Festival. I wasn't aware of Labia, which you said.
Yeah.
So my point was that because it's Bombay, there
Yeah.
are these communities that exist.
Oh,
You
yes.
know, I know Gazy exists, and
Yeah.
they've been producing this for a while.
Yeah.
So
Labia is also Bombay based, actually, I think. Yeah.
okay, I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
I
but
think
hadn't
so,
heard
yeah.
about them. So
I'm not absolutely sure, but I think so.
they're underground.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
basically, my point was, you know, how have zines actually sort of emerged in a way that have managed to give these communities a sort of voice? And you see some really exciting work as far as zines and self-published comics. So, you know,
Yes.
and we're going to talk about that later. So
I think,
don't
yeah,
have
yes.
much time.
So I think it's like, I think they don't need permission. And because you're in an urban space like Bombay,
there is more sort of permission in a sense, or you give yourself permission in an anonymous sort of...
Yeah, I think there's
Sitting.
more people who are coming together as
Yeah.
young folk. I don't think they can do that in necessarily in other spaces.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's like a lot of young people and, you know, club culture and all of those things, and that allows, facilitates these kind of different voices. And the whole idea of not having to take permission is what's beautiful about zines. You don't have to pass through a mainstream publisher or something like that. So it's really nice and raw. And I think the city does lend itself to that because of the kind of little, like there's a space for everyone in Bombay, so everyone has like a voice to make, you know, like a zine, like that, those communities exist, yeah.
I think we're a little running out of time. Okay. Sorry, just So I think for people that don't know, although I know that I explained what everybody on the panel does, I thought it was interesting to kind of explain again that Meera has a design studio where she straddles graphic design and illustration. Anirudh's work's been in the motion graphics and animation space. And you're also very closely connected to the music scene in Bombay. Cyrus, of course, works in advertising, so he's from...
Darkest soul.
Yes. So you bring three very diverse perspectives as far as illustration's concerned. So I thought it was interesting to kind of understand for a lot of people here, how different is it to create to create an illustration that's commissioned by, say, a big FMCG company or a real estate company versus, when you get commissioned by, say, a not-for-profit, you've done, I was looking at some of the work that you've done in the not-for-profit space. Yeah. How different is that? And, then, of course, for Anirudh, where you're doing motion graphics for, say, for the Sacred Games, how different is it to kind of, how do you sort of explain that to somebody here who wants to understand, scale, craft? Who wants to go first? The big bad world of advertising.
Okay. I think illustration advertising is actually, honestly, underutilized in India, in my opinion. Yeah. Really. My agency, I feel, is an exception.
Yeah. But that's also because you have filter shop, so you have...
No, not really, actually. I mean, yeah, now and maybe looking at filter shop. Sure. But we've always pushed illustration even for mainstream clients, like whether it's a large-scale builder. Right. Illustration can sort of convey themes of luxury sometimes that even photography can't really. Right. I mean, who wants to see large renders of people sipping wine all the time? Illustration is so much more classy. So, but I still feel it's very underutilized. A lot of the industry uses it for, as we learned earlier, scam awards. Sadly, they take these take months correcting these hyper-realistic sort of illustrations and then submit them. But I think there's a lot of opportunity. But the good news is, I think social media has actually opened up a lot of opportunity for for illustration in advertising. Yeah. And it's sort of growing. I'm seeing it myself. So definitely.
Why specifically advertising? I know that it's been quite a great platform for illustrators to reach out independently, but why specific to advertising? Just want to understand.
I think it's hard to sort of put a finger on it. Sure. Honestly, one of it is budget and time, to be honest, because a lot of clients look at digital as a cheaper medium. Sure. They don't want to invest large budgets, so that's worked to the advantage of illustrators because they can sort of churn it out at a cheaper rate, quicker, because nobody necessarily wants to invest in a shoot for online. So that's where the opportunity lies.
Okay. I would also say that there are so many new products coming. I mean, the market opened up a few, 10, 12 years, I don't know when it actually did, when MNCs started coming in a big way. 1990. And because there are so many brands, there's a need to differentiate. Right. And illustration is one of those ways that you can differentiate very well, because a photographer is generally going to do, I mean, there is a lot of differentiation even within that, but there's a demand for new styles because you have to constantly make yourself look different from your competitor. So I think that really...
Okay, so but then since you've got the mic right now, how different is it when you're designing for a larger FMCG versus, say, a not-for-profit? How different is that process?
I think I can boss around the not-for-profits because they have no idea what I think they don't know. They're just fascinated by the fact that they could actually represent these ideas. So it's very easy in that sense, as long as they're pliable to some extent. Okay. So you can either get very great results out of them, or at the outset that they're not going to bend. Right. But when it comes to FMCG, you do have to cater to like very trendy, very relevant, what's the buzzword right now, what's the trendy thing right now, what do people like to see, like this brush script, for example, that you see everywhere, on wedding cards and things like that is really in. So whatever you do with that is acceptable to them. Sure. So I think that's the difference, at least for me right now, is that there's a mainstream approach, and then there's something that I can do which is very offbeat for a not-for-profit. Right.
You're able to push a lot of your more sort of individual style onto products.
Yeah, like definitely.
That, where you're not perhaps able to experiment with the larger FMCG.
Yeah, not as much.
Okay.
They push their own agenda. Like they know what they want.
Okay. Anirudh, do you
disagree with
oh,
that.
Yeah?
Okay.
They don't know what they want.
They don't know.
We might have clients here. We might have
Not my clients.
here.
My clients are the best.
Very smoothly done. So, Anirudh, do you want to...
Yeah. So I think Sacred Games actually is a really good example of what you can do with illustration, which is not a direct depiction, where you're not kind of doing these figurative drawings, or there's no anatomy or any of that.
Right.
Because so for each, there's these episode titles which are speaking about, the names come from these tales from Indian epics.
Right.
So, but they are kind of representative. They are represented through this decorative geometry.
The mandalas.
The mandalas, yes.
Yeah.
So I think that's also a really interesting way where you're not being very direct about what the storyline is, but of course, while I was designing it, there is a story within how I'm making it. So it's kind of I'm having fun with it while I'm making it, and I know what the story is like. Of course, if you ask me, I can kind of go over it. But
So,
each of them have a story, but it's never a very direct thing. And of course, there's these symbols in the center of each
Yes.
mandala, which are representative of that particular episode.
Okay. So I was actually coming to the point where I was going to ask all of you about a project that you've done that would sort of be very evocative of Bombay as a city. And, Sacred Games is really sort of set in Bombay. If, we could start with you and then everybody else could sort of take it from there.
So actually what Meera was talking about earlier as well, it's there is this parallel of this behavior of decorating
Ornamentation.
everything,
Yeah.
everywhere. Like it's so present in Bombay. Like everywhere you see, people are trying to decorate.
Do we still
every
have
small
that?
thing.
There was a backlash in saying like let's just pare down everything. I mean, your style is very minimalistic, and
Yeah,
you could
I
say
think
that's
it
been a
kind of
response
ranges
to-
between both ends of the spectrum.
Right.
Yeah.
Sorry. So.
But yeah, I think it's even with the Sacred Games, I think it's kind of that same
Decorative.
that same
ornamentation.
decorative kind of thing that kind of comes around, where you have this central motif, and then you kind of decorate it with elements around it.
Right.
Yes.
So, what did you have in mind when you were doing that? Like, what was the brief, and how did you sort of
So-
tie that in with the fact that this show is
Sure.
set in Bombay? It's about the underworld and this good
Yeah.
cop and.
I mean, so actually, when the brief came to me, it was quite clear, because in the book there is this there's a mandala, which is like a very important part of the show.
Okay.
So obviously I got in touch because of my work with geometry, and from there on it was quite simple. The interesting part was kind of creating these different mandalas for each episode title. So there's one main mandala with the S and G interlocking unit, which is like Sacred Games. It's also like Sartaj and Gaitonde. So there was that, and then based on that, then there were these individual ones that we had created. But yeah.
Meera, do you want to take it?
I
project
think
that-
I think I already kind of touched upon it, but Lift Karade was, I think, that because of that city
Those
of
machines
dreams.
at
Yeah.
railway stations.
Yeah, so that sort of joy you see, and that's kind of like, as a kid, that's what you dream of, or that's what you like to engage with, or it's novel.
Right.
Like you wait for that, that kind of moment, and
That
then the
little
fact that you
punch,
have this migrant laborer kind of coming to Bombay and trying to fulfill his dreams. So the kind of thing he goes through, I think it's much more easy though if you see the print, because I would be over explaining it if I did. But yes,
Sorry, we
don't
can't
have
play
it right
that
now.
when it's
Yeah,
distracting when.
that's okay. But yeah, that I think was like you come to Bombay to kind of fulfill your dreams,
Right.
and that's the point where you just put in something and you get like your fortune being
Yeah.
told.
It's like a fortune telling
That
device.
yeah, I think that was like, for me, I think
Okay.
the most Mumbai specific piece.
Okay. Sai.
Okay. I'm guessing you thought I'd speak about I Take This Train to my first book.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to. There was this small project that I sort of only put up on Instagram
Okay.
and maybe on Facebook.
Okay.
So it's my form of a zine, which was called Trees of RA. It was this comic
Oh, yeah, I
series.
was playing with
Oh, was it playing? Oh, yeah, I did
Earlier.
that. Okay, sure. So I grew up in Andheri, Morol, so RA Colony was very close to me. I used to take walks in it like regularly as a kid. But the last few years, they announced that there's going to be a metro car shed, not the metro that's going through RA, and they're going to like chop through the entire area, and that really upset me. And what I did is I created a series of comics where I illustrated trees and I gave them a voice, because I feel that trees don't have, I mean, obviously they don't have a voice, but they really don't have a voice. You know, nobody speaks up for them. Not enough people speak up for them. So the entire series with this comic series of each tree sort of addressing the issue. Like, for example, one of them said, I'm a son of the soil, you know, and sons of the soil are supposed to get benefits in this state. So where are my benefits? Another one claimed that he's 110 years old. So where's his heritage status? You know, why isn't he protected? So that was a project that was also fun, because I mixed around, I sort of drew trees in different sort of techniques, whatever came to me, and something that I was passionate about and sort of rooted in Bombay for sure also.
This is something that I spoke to you guys about before the talk started, which is I was reading an article by Stephen Heller, who is one of the foremost thinkers in graphic design. And he wrote, and this was dated 2006, where he said illustrations being edged out by graphic design and, you know, and photography. And he's sort of bemoaning the fact that it's losing its relevance. And I think that was 2006. A lot has changed since then. I think there's been a huge resurgence in illustration as an industry. It's sort of really front and center. And I wanted to understand, as people who are practicing the craft, what do you think are the reasons for it? Like, what do you think has sort of led to this sort of resurgence?
In India or in
it could be both.
Bombay,
I mean,
or
yeah.
like, okay. I think
in general, I mean, we see that this is illustration has sort of re-emerged, and you know, it's sort of
here
like
definitely. I think illustrators have a voice now. Earlier, like in the early days of advertising, you would know that.
Thanks for saying early days of advertising and pointing at me.
And me, as well as
days of yore.
You know, it was like the illustrator is the storyboard artist who is stuck in the studio in the basement. Like O&M has like the studio in the basement where all the illustrators.
Like you're banished there.
Yeah, you're banished to the underworld,
right.
and you're like you're just told what to do, and you're just sort of following the art director's lead. But today the illustrators are also.
It's more conceptual. They have that freedom to sort of. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure why India has like taken to illustration so much in the past, say, 6 years.
Sure.
But I would definitely say, I mean, there were a couple of illustrators who made it happen, like Sameer or Kolavur or like Lokesh Karekar, who made it a thing that was led by their voices or their styles.
Of course.
Yeah, I think like definitely. I think earlier a lot of fine artists kind of became illustrators because they were then stuck in these ad jobs.
Right.
So you'd see a lot of these fine artists who would then just be in advertising agencies and doing these sort of illustrations. But definitely now it's completely changed. Like you said, Sameer, Kolavur, Lokesh, like they kind of became like on the.
And they've been part of the industry. I mean, they're sort of the front runners of, you know, holding up illustration and like sort of soldiering on.
So earlier probably it was like the illustrator would never go for that client meeting, but they kind of, you know, they blurred that. Like now they're taking correct. They're like they're kind of leaders in that in design in general. I think that's quite interesting. So definitely illustration is coming back, or it is back rather.
Sure.
I think, I mean, the mediums have changed in 2006. We didn't even have graphic drawing tablets also. I mean, I didn't have at least that time. None of us did that time. So as you mentioned, it was fine art at that point. You know, so it was actually limited. So I think it's opened up in that sense. The techniques you can use with graphic design and illustration sort of coming together. Social media came in. I mean, Facebook didn't exist in 2006, if I'm not mistaken. And so many other platforms. Instagram has made celebrities of so many illustrators actually. Malika Favre, I mean, she became so famous with that Kama Sutra sort of alphabet that she created, and that made her a rock star. And so many others have leveraged it so much.
Well,
so
actually, a friend pointed out out, and he's here in the audience. I was discussing this point with him, and he said, you know, a lot of it is also to do with the mobile camera that's sort of come in, because that sort of pushed down the value of photography, of like, you know, real sort of photography. So in that sense, do you think you kind of agree that that sort of pushed illustration sort of front and center?
Yeah, I mean, if it's easy to do, then it's not as valuable.
Correct. So it's undervalued, and therefore let's
the rarer thing
scratch.
gets more value. Yeah.
I always had this plan actually, because it's true what you said. It's easy to do than the client, whoever doesn't value it. So I wanted to take Microsoft Word and create a very complicated sort of software that nobody can easily use. So then they wouldn't be able to like change words and ads and whatnot. So I'm still working on that.
So I had a question which is also connected to the bystander anthology that Meera wants to talk about, and we also want to talk to her about. But I thought, sorry. Yes. Which was, we'll get to the bystander anthology then, but I thought there's one great power that illustration really has is to break down very complex ideas into very, you know, easily accessible themes that then people can understand. And I remember for me, it kind of hit the nail on the head. There was this comic done by this woman called Emma, which was The Mental Load. I don't know if anybody here remembers. This is a comic that she had created. And it was a very simple comic which basically spoke about the mental load that women carry through the day. You know, they're working. At the same time, they sort of have to remember 15, 20 things related to the household, child rearing. And it's, if anybody hasn't seen it, you could just Google it. It's Mental Load by Emma. I don't think she has a last name. It's just Emma. And it really went viral. And then, you know, you had all of these articles that spoke about the mental load. And actually, if you think about it, it's a very simple idea that we're probably all aware of. I'd never thought of it till I saw that comic. Yeah. And I said, how did I not think of something that stares at me in the face every day, you know, whether at home, at work. You know, it's a very simple sort of thing, but I'm saying like illustration is actually a great way to tell that story. I don't think any other sort of medium could do that.
Abstract thought really well.
Yeah. So
it's easy to like even
capture.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, words can get lost because it depends on you understand the language, but when it comes to visuals, you like just get it.
That's like instant.
Correct.
So even seeing like somebody darks, like if you're drawing and you draw a dark-skinned person in a particular costume or whatever, I know that's like somebody. I know how to identify that person without you writing all those words describing the person. Instantly, I know it. So that's.
So we'll get to Bystander, the anthology, and maybe, you know, you've just managed to get your entire goal of do you want to tell us the figure? It's 56?
So it was £42,000, but we got 114% funded.
Which is amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So do you want to tell the people assembled here what Bystander is all about? I think it's amazing. I think the best part about the fact that you've been able to get this funded is you're going to be able to pay every single creative person who's worked on this project. And as most creative people here might know, that's a very challenging task. So do you want to tell us, and do you want to tell us how this came to be? You're part of Kadak Collective, and this is Kadak which has managed to pull this through.
So we were facing this problem for around a year, where we were like, you know, we are somewhat privileged people being able to do this kind of work for free. You know, doing reading rooms and libraries where we were putting our zines out, and you know, but that's something that we can do because we come from a certain class or you know, those kind of things.
Class and
certain privileges that we have. And we were like, you know, there are so few creative voices of the marginalized, and how do we get them their space in this sort of place in the sun and give them a spotlight, and as a result foreground their vantage points and their identity and what their experiences are, and make it so, because they're creatives, they're, you know, visually they are able to represent it and in a very engaging and very accessible way through images. So we were like toying with this idea for some time. I think it started out as geography and gender first. And then and Akhila Krishnan, who was on Kadak, came up with the idea of like, why don't we do something with Kickstarter? And this geography and gender idea was already there. We had a presentation that went to Godrej Culture Lab and so and so people, and no one give us the time of day, to be honest. But then,
Anybody from Godrej here?
no, I mean, it was just something that, you know, like, I mean, it just got swept on the rug with all our other things and everything. So at some point we were like, you know, we have to do something like this, because we also can't not get paid all the time, you know. And one of the ideas also that came out, geography and gender, there were in the last 3 or 4 years lots of ideas done like that. So Aarti, the other member, came up with the idea of the bystander, and I was just like, wow, this is amazing, because when we talk about privilege, often we do foreground the other person's experience, but the person who's experiencing it, what they're going through, we want to foreground their experience. But what does the other person do? How does the other person help out? Or why doesn't the other person take cognizance of something that's terrible that's happening to a community or a group of people with a certain identity? And that's how it came up. And deciding to do it with 51 contributors is a way to say, not only is it obviously incredibly diverse, because we have religion, we have different countries, the diaspora experience as well as the native experience.
Exclusion, gender, I'm trying to remember something.
Yeah, so just every kind of, we have outsider art, so we have, there's a school of autistic kids who are learning how to draw, and their artwork is really amazing, but they just don't have that platform, all of these things. So we put them all together in one mixed bag, and we said we'll support this kind of thing. So it's disability, mental health, all of these things come under this purview.
And how many artists, just to get everybody?
There are 51 contributors. Right. So some of them are author, illustrator pairs. But yeah, I mean, the reason we got fully funded is because we have 51 contributors too. So that was like also a move in terms of like, yes, let's make it diverse, but let's also access all these networks all at once so that we get funded.
No, but I think there's obviously some value a lot of people see in seeing those kind of stories coming
yes, I
out
think
today.
People want to choose what they see.
Simplifying the 51 artists network.
It definitely, so I mean to say it in the sense that diversity was a win for us in that sense. Because if we had gone the mainstream way and done a homogenized commercial aspect, we may have made the money still. But we made it because of the diverse thing. And I think that is like the really cool
something
aspect.
You're proud of.
Yeah, I think that's a win for us. I honestly didn't think it would get funded. I was a skeptic of the group, but I think it was great that it did. Yeah.
Congratulations,
Thank you
did. And we're all looking forward. The book comes out in January.
Jan 2020. Yes.
All the best.
Yes, thank you.
I'm sure I speak for the panel. So we'd like to open it up for a Q&A. Does anybody have questions?
You can. It's fine. My name is Bhavya. I'm an archivist. So my question is, we tend to associate comics with humor a lot more than any other kind of thing. So you talked about train journeys and, and I saw some of the illustrations that you've done. So you talked about the lightness and, the overcrowded trains. That was what you were illustrating. But the fact is that's a problem, right? I mean, if that hand slips, it's a life or death situation. So, and Meera, you talked about how you can exaggerate in an illustration to make a point that is subtle in patriarchy eyes. So my question is that as a cartoonist, graphic designer, illustrator, do you feel that you have to rely too much on humor to make your work more accessible?
Yes, that is true. I mean, when we're talking about even the Bystander project, you have all these artists coming from various backgrounds. They're writing comics, they're writing and drawing comics. But we're trying to get it to be considered a serious medium, which can really, it may be using humor in some parts of the project, but definitely as something like if you look at the work of, say, Chris Ware, for example, he has very serious, like depression, lots of things tackled in those books, and it's all very cartoony looking. So I think we do get that, don't take them too seriously, that kind of thing. Yeah, definitely.
I think also humor is like a gateway, sort of put your point across sometimes. because if you sort of present a point of view straightforward, sometimes, particularly nowadays, but if you sort of serve it up with, sorry?
People can't take it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you serve it up with a bit of humor. Sometimes, I think it can make its point a little more incisively. Sometimes with humor, although it depends on the context. I mean, I'm all for hard-hitting creatives too, for sure. But humor is, I think, been my creative strength, which is why I sort of rely on it.
You kind of tell parables also sometimes, where you just use metaphors instead of using, you know, like pointing out people very specifically.
Yeah, I mean,
and
we
humor
also
can do
spoke
that.
about R.K. Lakshman, right? I mean, earlier on. So if R.K. Lakshman had just not used humor, sorry.
Along the funny line, or you come to that?
Is there pressure to sort of
Is there
make
pressure?
it?
Do you feel like that?
No,
You
I
know,
don't feel
kind
that
of
pressure. I mean, I don't feel that pressure.
Sometimes, not all the time.
Actually, interesting. Like, I think Kritika has done this thing that I remember seeing, which was about male privilege in her family,
Yeah.
and she sort of was calling out. I'm sorry, I can't give you a reference, but like, I think Kritika is part of the anthology as well,
Yes.
and I think there's a
She worked with
distinct,
Kada,
yeah. So there's this comic, and there was nothing humorous about it at all. It was really a sort of recalling of male privilege in the household and sort of calling it out, and how her grandmother was able to fight for the country's freedom but couldn't fight for her own. There was nothing funny about it at all, and I think it was a very insightful piece on what we probably see every day in our own homes. I know that that's true probably for a lot of comics that we see, but I think that's changing, and we're all the more richer for it.
I actually think comics is cursed with the Superman superhero thing, really. That's when people think about comics, they just think that. And that's sad. Yeah.
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 Yes.
Yeah.
That was our first introduction to comics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
In
I mean,
India.
we have a lot of
Tinkle.
stuff to unlearn also from
Yes.
what we learned. Yeah.
And thank you to the three panelists today for making the time to
Thank
come
you.
all the way and talk their heart out.
Thank
and
you for inviting
Asad
us.
and his amazing team at Avid, who've been arranging this for the last 2 months. That's what I remember. I think that's when how long.
Advanced
you, Gaurav.
planning.
Yes. So thank you, and it was a pleasure being here. I hope it was fun.
Thank you. It's a great panelist, great conversation. You know, I just as I was sitting and hearing you all speak, I mean, I love the idea of all people from advertising have such wonderful ideas and reincarnations. But no one went to sleep. But, you know, I was just thinking of this thing I just saw, which is this French-Tunisian artist who does calligraphy, Al-Cid. And his work is all over the world. In the British Museum, it's on frescoes around France, has collaborated with MAC, and has developed a whole line of packaging that takes calligraphy, illustration, the arts into such a mass, I mean, in such a creative way to be, you know, we have now a new output for it. And you know how India takes inspiration from the West. So I'm sure we'll have lots of wonderful illustration going out in various different ways that people can consume it just besides, you know. And again, you know, R.K. Lakshman and Mario Miranda were icons at that time, you know, maybe a few decades later, these are the icons along with the Samir Kuravurs. And so they're inspiration to the next generation who's going to also learn that their art in a different way. Some of you all may have actually used your hand when you all practice, but the future generations are not. And so it's an interesting space to be in. And that's why we actually started this series. Again, I'd mentioned this is the 40th edition of it, where we try and look at aspects, how the city has been impacted by it. The next one in this series is going to be on independence in our city. We're missing the one in July. That's going to be in August for Independence Day. And after that, we're going to do one on alternate forms of learning. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being a great audience. Thank you to the NGMA and the Ministry of Culture, Government of India for partnering with us. And we have a very interesting workshop on Saturday on creativity and Kathak. And I think many of you all have put your names in to attend as our guest. And you'll be hearing from the teams tomorrow. So hopefully you all will show up. It's promising to be a great day of creativity and thinking. Thank you very much and have a good night. Thank you again.